Hello and welcome to this webinar on Eforms Part 2, the advanced use of Eforms. My name is Jennifer Schmidt. I'm joined today by David Popay, the Managing Director of Datatron in the UK. Datatron is one of our oldest and most knowledgeable partners that we have. They've been working together with Therefore for over 20 years. They started back when it was called Ada Software, and they've got lots of customers, and they've been really essential in helping these customers come up with great solutions to help them manage their businesses, records, access to data. And so you're going to see today that Datatron came up with a really clever solution to help the NHS. So today we'll be talking about the NHS use case. I'll give you a brief technical overview of what the solution is, and then I'll hand over to David for the technical deep dive. And finally, at the end, we'll open the floor up to some questions. So as you watch today, make sure to write your questions down. We will answer them at the end, just so that you can really get a chance to hear exactly how it works. So just to give you a brief overview of what the customer is, the customer is called NHS Northumbria. The Northumbria NHS Trust cares for a population of about 500,000 people across Northumberland and North Tyneside in the UK. The care is supported by a team of over 9,000 staff spread across 30 remote sites. So as you can imagine, this is a huge number of staff, and they have an HR department, and they needed a way to manage all the confidential staff records efficiently, all while keeping high security, of course. Now, one of the key processes that they need to do is they need a pregnancy risk assessment for compliance reasons. Previously, this risk assessment was done on paper, which was timely. It was cumbersome to deal with the paper. They had high storage costs. It was difficult to access the records. So by moving to an eForm powered by Therefore, they've really been able to increase the efficiency, visibility, and just the overall ease at which this assessment is carried out. So the solution that we have is the employee fills out the assessment via eForm. The form is saved to their HR case file, so the key data is saved to their case file. And then all of the data from the questions, and there's many questions on such an assessment, is saved to a processing category. And what that processing category does, it allows them to push those answers out to other eForms in the future, which saves them the hassle of having to type in manually all that data again and again. It really provides them a very efficient, streamlined way to do those assessments. So all of the employees have a case file, and of course the risk assessment will be put into that case file as well. And of course a workflow is then used to help them ensure that next assessments are done on time, nothing is forgotten. It allows managers to have a bird's eye view of where those employees are in their pregnancy and breastfeeding journeys, so that they can really see what needs to be done in order to assure compliance is achieved, and also for those employees so that they can have a safe working environment. So in depth, what exactly is done? David is going to show you this in detail, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview right now so that you can perhaps better understand what's going on. So the eForm collects the employee data for compliance, right? Just like in any other Therefore situation, the eForm is then mapped to a Therefore category. In this case, the data is mapped to two categories. One's in their HR case file, the key data is taken, but then they also have a processing category, which is in the background, which isn't visible to regular managers or employees. It's really just functions as a category where all of the previous eForm response data is kept, because then that data can be harvested and placed into future eForms as well. So we say here is number 2, important metadata is saved to the HR case file as well for visibility in daily use. So that's the really clever thing, is that they're using two different categories. One is just a case file where it just collects the most important data, and the other one is kind of a back-end processing category. And workflows, of course, help ensure future risk assessments are done on time and provide a high-level overview of the process. So by combining clever category design, eForms, and workflows, they really have a very streamlined, efficient, end-to-end solution that takes care of all of the customer's needs and makes the employees' lives so much easier. As I mentioned before, this is a really clever solution, and I think so many of your customers would also benefit. So as you can see, visibility, they can see past assessments and future dates of needed assessments. Different teams can easily monitor the process and check what needs to be done or what's coming up in the future. It's automated because of the workflows. It saves a lot of paper, so they were able to get rid of all of their cumbersome, time-consuming paper-based processes. And also it's all secure too. So they are able to store all the responses, and therefore they have complete security and traceability of all of the responses. And they've got complete access control for the case file as well as for the eForms. So overall, this is just a very clever, innovative, and useful solution. Let me hand over to David now, who will go and show you exactly what it looks like and exactly how it was configured.
Thank you very much for joining us for eForms Part 2. In this webinar, we'll be looking at the same eForm again, but in a lot more detail, and also looking at how that relates to the case file that it sits in. Just as a brief reminder, this is an HR case file setup, and we are using the eForms to create what is a pregnancy risk assessment form. So this is a form which is filled in by the line manager, occupational health, and the employee, and the end result is deposited back inside the case file. Quick overview of the case file first, just to remind you of what that looks like. So we've got a personnel case file, and this little particular example, we've got 4 personnel case files, employees that are within there. That's broken down into recruitment, staff development, and so on and so forth, 6 categories. But the 7th one here, risk assessments, this is where the eForm is deposited into at the end of that assessment process. Now beneath this, we highlighted these last time but didn't go into any great detail, are the processing categories. These are the categories that push that data around on the eForm and within the categories in order to get that collaboration that we want to achieve between the line manager, the occupational health staff, and the employee. So 2 of these are visible by HR administration. The other 3 are not visible at all by anyone other than IT administration and the staff who design the categories. To the bottom, next assessment is in progress. I'll give you a quick overview of those because these are the ones that are used by the HR administration staff. In progress, just do a quick look at that and see what's there. So this gives the HR admin staff a bit of a bird's eye view of where an assessment is at any one time. This one I can see it's waiting for occupational health response, but it hasn't been sent to occupational health yet. Waiting for line manager acceptance and employee acceptance, and if we go to date of next assessment or next assessment processing category, that's pretty much what it says on the tin. That shows you the date of the next assessment for a particular employee. So these 2 are kind of used by the HR administration staff just to see where an assessment is in progress. The other 3 are very much pushing data around within the eForm, so it actually makes up the content of the next form that gets processed. So that eForm, if we just have a quick look at it again, you may remember, looks a bit like this. Now there's 132 fields on this eForm, and they are fields within the processing category. And this is where the processing category collects the data from these fields. Working through the form, the tick boxes, the radio buttons, the full text fields, and the drop down boxes all field information into that processing category. So if we have a look at Solution Designer and see what's ticking behind the scenes of Navigator to make that happen. Okay, so there's our case file setup, there's our categories, and coming down we've got our processing categories here. So the in progress one, if you look at that one first, this very much has got all the main fields in. The first few fields, they feed from the case file itself. So this is when you type in the assignment number and it pulls back the mandatory fields from the case file. The rest of the information, the summary information, is stuff that it actually collects from the form itself. So these are the fields which are displayed within the in progress category here. Going up to next assessment, and next assessment is just showing the employee data and the business unit and the date of next assessment. Okay, so the in progress category, this is the one which actually kicks off the process, because this generates the unique ID. Now the unique ID, I'll explain a little bit later on about that when we look at the workflows, but this is quite critical because this is what enables the form to drag information across from the previous form and onto the next form and onto the next form after that, because there was 4 forms in total. The first form is filled out by the line manager, asking questions to the employee. Once they've submitted that form, it potentially goes to occupational health. They put their information in. It's then sent back to the line manager. This is form 3, who then accepts or rejects that and puts some more comments on. And then it goes to the employee, the complete form with all the data from all of the 3 forms on it, for the employee to accept or reject the outcome of that assessment. So that unique ID is quite important because that's how we pull back the information. Long retention. And the long retention is used at the end of the process, and that actually pushes the log data out from the visibility of the log into the long retention, and that then hits a retention policy. If we look at the form itself, this is the biggie. This has got all the information in. So these are the 132 fields that make up this form here, with the one which is actually used by the client at the end of the day. So this is the information that it's collecting as it moves through the process. And if we look at the data, again, that again is collecting information. Now the difference between the form and the data is the form is pushing that data to the final form at the end of the process. The data processing category is actually harvesting that information and then pushing it on to the next form, and you'll see that in the workflow exactly how that happens. What we do is we'll have a quick glance at the workflow and see how that looks. If we come down to the in progress one, so this is the biggie. Okay, put this across a bit more. Okay, so the workflow itself is kind of split into 4. So these are the 4 forms. That's form 1, that's form 2, that block there, that's form 3, that block there, and that's form 4, that block there. So when a form is started, it generates a generic ID, and then it's applied with a unique ID. Now the unique ID is made up of the assessment number, the date, and the workflow instance. Now this is what makes this instance of data unique. So when the process is started and they're filling out the form here, that's already been stamped with that unique ID, and that's capturing the data for that particular instance. The reason why we're going to capture an instance of the workflow on the form is because it's going to know that it's the data from form 1 and it's passing it to form 2 and form 2 to form 3 and so on and so forth. So this is where that unique ID instance is applied to form 1 when starts the process. So the first part of this form, looking at form 1, when it gets down to this part here, this is updating the category, the in progress category. So that information's been put into the form and then it passes it across to the in progress category. Once that's been completed, it then adds in the date of next assessment and updates the next assessments category. This next path, these are all different scenarios of how a form can be actually submitted. So in form 1, it could have no occupational health requirement for input, so it goes down this arm of the workflow here. This arm of the workflow enables the line manager to close the form, so that's why it's got no date of next assessment. This arm of the workflow again allows a manager to close the form, but give another reason. Again, we've got form closed on that, and this arm of the workflow sends the form to occupational health. So you can see the email notifications here. This one here emails the employee to say that the form is ready. That one and that one emails the employee to say that form is closed, and so does that one. That's the one that's emailing occupational health, telling them they've got an input on the form and the response back from occupational health. When you move on to form 2, again, this is the occupational health's input that allows them to close the form and update the case. And when you come down here, that's telling them that they're updating the form with some additional information, and that's where it's feeding the information to the in progress category here. So again, what we're not doing is pushing images, we're pushing data. This is what the in progress category is used for. They're used to push data from the form into here to be held, to be then pushed out onto the form when the unique ID is typed in. That is then telling the line manager that occupational health have done their bit, and then that's pushed on. On to form 3. This is the line manager's input. Again, they put their input in, it updates the in progress in all 4 instances, and what they're either doing here is declining, accepting, adding to case, and this then contacts the employee with the outcome, updates the case file, and then back to the end of the workflow again. Finally, the last part of the process, form 4 on the last part of the process, is where the employee receives the form in its complete format with all the boxes grayed out from the previous information that's been completed. They then accept the form or decline the form. That then updates the line manager and then updates the next assessment. So what's happened here is it's went through all 4 stages of the risk assessment form. The employees accepted it. Then everything moves from the in progress, because it's not in progress, and goes to next assessment. So this was this item here. If we go back to the category layout on here, where we've got, there we go, there's the log file, as we call it, which is basically an index line, but that's saying that the form is finished, it's gone through its cycle, and what we have now is a date of next assessment, and that's where it updates that and adds that information to the date of next assessment processing category. This is where it puts out the CSV file. I mentioned before that this project also had the added benefit of being able to harvest information that the department never had an opportunity to get before. So this then pushes a CSV out to a watch folder for the client, and they then harvest that information into their database for future use. Then finally into the case file. So what goes into the case file at the end of the process, if we possibly have a look at one of these, is the completed form. So just click on any one of these examples and open them up, and there's your completed form. On this particular one we skipped the Occ Health section, but that's what goes into the case file and is saved at the end of the process. And within the workflow, this is where that adds that in and pushes that along. Now, there are three other workflows here as well, and what you've also got is the email delays. If you have a quick look at this one, so much smaller than the in progress one. The in progress one is mapping the journey of the unique ID and the data content that's been added to the form and adding it to the in progress categories as it moves along until finally it pushes the data out onto the form and adds and updates the assessment category. With the email delays workflow, much smaller, much simple. This is sending out the reminders. When we go back to the next assessments, not in progress, all these email reminders that are going out to line managers and the employee are getting controlled by here. You've got a wait. So what happens in these is the email goes out. We've got to collects the date that the email out and tells it to -5 days wait for that date, and that before it sends the email out. Then this one here is waiting 2 days before it sends another email reminder out. So what you're doing is presetting the date, but also presetting the delay of when the reminders go out. So that's how you do email reminders, basically, for notifications that are going to go out to members of staff. The next assessments is this one here. Again, very simple. The purpose of the next assessment one is it just captures that data and pushes it into the next assessments category. So this was kind of this action here at the very end. I've finished everything, the data's pushed along, but it needs an additional workflow just to jog that along into the next assessments category to update that, because you can physically see there it's updating the category before it moves to the end. And finally, we've got the retention. So what happens with the retention one is, again, this is not about the document, this is about the data in progress on the form. And if we go back up to these two, in progress and next assessments, what I pointed out before was in the in progress, what we're seeing is where a form is at any one point, by employee, the date, and has it been seen by line manager yet, has it been seen by occupational health yet, and so on and so forth. So once it's completed its first tranche of assessments and it's accepted by the employee, it needs to be pushed out into the next assessments category. So it clears the in progress, moves this information to the next assessments, and just shows the next assessment for that particular employee. In order to clear that, it needs a workflow to push that information out into the retention. The retention does adhere this long retention category. All the long retention category is a record of that assessment data, again only data that was used to populate the form, gets pushed into retention, and then a retention policy hits which removes that from view. So the workflow is all about pushing the data around, not necessarily the document, because the document is an eForm and the eForm was made up of data. So what the challenge here was is, how do you present a snazzy eForm to the end user, to the customer, that they could quite easily fill in and then populate at the end of that process into the risk assessments category for that particular employee, a nice PDF of that completed eForm with all the evidence in. Now the way to do that is to push it around using processing categories. So what we're pushing around is not the form, we're pushing the data around. So we're taking data here, 132 fields of data, and we're collecting that information, we're pushing it around from in progress to next assessment to long retention to delete. But at the end of that process, it's getting the PDF is getting saved into the category. Now, where that unique ID comes in is when they do the next round of assessments. What they wanted was the ability for the line manager to pull back all that information that they completed on the last form. Now, as we know, when a form gets saved, it gets saved as a PDF. We cannot then go back and harvest this information. It's not there. So that information gets stored, and it gets stored into this data category. And what happens is you type in that unique ID, and then it pulls back all the data from the data category and pre-populates the next form ready. Because the client kind of wanted to use this eForm a bit like a Word document, where they could just have a template of the responses from the last assessment, so they didn't have to type them out again, and so they had a reminder of what they actually said the last time. So how do you pre-populate a form with information that was used in the last assessment? You store it somewhere, and you store it in the data category, but in order for it to be unique to that employee, to that instance, to that assessment series, it needs a unique ID. And this is why the unique ID is added into the workflow very early on here, and it's tagged with the assessment number, the date, and the workflow instance, so the instance that that was completed. Sounds very complicated, and it is a bit. It takes a bit of getting your head round, and I think what you're going to do is think about, okay then, a form isn't necessarily a image or a item or a piece of paper. A form is data. And if you get it in your head that you're pushing data around and not necessarily a document, then you can really apply lots of fancy logic and use the processing categories to push that data around. Because all you're doing is collecting information and then chucking it down into a nice fancy PDF at the end of the process like this. Most importantly, capturing the information that the client wants and getting the record of the signature from the client. And then we've got the added benefit of pushing out a CSV at the end of the process. So I said we'll take a bit of a deeper dive into the eForm and the mechanics and how that worked in this webinar session. What we weren't going to do was talk about how do you make an eForm, because there's lots of resource out there on how to do that. This was really showing you how you can use data within an eForm to create a collaboration on eForms and pass eForms from person to person, holding that data and then finally depositing that information back into the case file for the employee. And this really complements a HR case file setup, because in the HR case file setup you've got this great feature of creating a very detailed, well-structured, laid out case file with keyworded forms and documents that go in. eForms is taking that client to the next level by saying, hey, let's do away with this paper process and create an electronic process for it, where you just fill in an eForm and it deposits the information into the case file directly. But using workflow cleverly, using processing categories cleverly, and using emails, reminders cleverly, you can then really use business process improvement to make the whole process frictionless. I hope you've enjoyed the session for the eForms 2 webinar session. If you've got any questions, please just put them through on the messaging and we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much indeed. Bye now.